Before modern farming scaled up, most fruit trees and vines carried a simple insurance policy inside them: seeds. When animals ate fruit, when winds shook branches, when fruit dropped and broke open, seeds spread. Some sprouted nearby, some travelled far. Each new plant arrived slightly different from the last because it came from a new mix of traits. That constant reshuffling mattered. In any valley or orchard, no two plants reacted exactly the same way to cold snaps, drought, or a new blight. A sickness might tear through one patch, then stall when it met trees that resisted it by chance. Loss still happened, but collapse rarely spread evenly. Diversity did not look like a strategy, it simply acted like one. Farmers still selected good fruit and saved pits, stones, and seeds, but nature did much of the work without being asked. New seedlings kept appearing, and most failed, yet a few suited the local soil and weather better than anything planted before. Over generations, fields stayed messy and varied. That messiness kept the food supply standing when trouble arrived. In orchards and fields, small accidents happened. A plant produced fruit with fewer seeds, or softer seeds, or seeds that barely formed at all. It was rare, but it stood out. People noticed it first for a simple reason. It felt better to eat, less spitting, less waste. And once a farmer tasted that difference, a question followed right behind it. If this fruit was easier, why not grow more of it? The market rewarded that idea fast. Merchants preferred fruit that customers finished quickly and bought again. Low-seed fruit also moved better through trade because every bite matched the promise. Sellers could charge more for better fruit, and farmers could count on steadier demand. So when a grower found a tree or vine that made these unusual fruits, it stopped being a curiosity. It became something to protect, copy, and spread to neighbors. That choice changed the direction of farming. Fields started filling with plants selected for convenience, not for their ability to reproduce on their own. The old system produced variety by default. This new preference narrowed it on purpose. Every season, the easiest fruit gained ground because it fit the human side of the bargain. Simple to eat, simple to sell. The shift looked like progress, but it quietly tied success to a smaller set of winners. Seedless fruit sounded like a miracle, but it carried a catch. If a plant produced little or no viable seed, it could not reliably make the same fruit again. Growers solved that by copying the plant itself. They took cuttings, rooted them, and made new plants that matched the original. They grafted a prized branch onto a tough root system, and the fruit stayed the same. This changed everything about scale. A single lucky mutant no longer stayed local or temporary. It became a template. Orchards could expand fast because every new tree could be a piece of the old one. The result looked like progress. Fruit that tasted identical, ripened on schedule, and pleased buyers every time. But it also meant the genetics stopped shifting from generation to generation. Later, tissue culture pushed that idea even further. Instead of copying plants one branch at a time, growers multiplied clean, uniform plantlets in huge numbers, then shipped them out to be planted almost anywhere. Seedless stopped being a rare treat and became a dependable product line. The same few winners could fill markets all year. Convenience finally became industrial because sameness became easy to reproduce. By the time seedless fruits became easy to copy, the market stopped asking for many choices. It asked for the same fruit every time. Growers responded with a simple rule: plant what buyers demanded and plant a lot of it. A few elite varieties, picked for sweetness, size, shelf life, and uniform color, spread across countries and continents. Diversity shrank, not with a crash, but with steady replacement. Uniformity paid. Packing houses sorted faster when fruit matched a template. Shippers lost less money when each box ripened on schedule. Supermarkets planned displays when a variety behaved the same week after week. So farms reorganized around scale, and scale favored sameness. Fields that once mixed types became single-crop blocks, and those blocks expanded. The food system treated variety like a complication, and it quietly removed it from the equation. This shift created a new kind of risk, even as profits rose. When one variety dominated, a bad year stopped being local. It traveled. A pest that liked that fruit found endless food. A disease that fit that plant met the same genetics again and again, like identical locks on every door in a city. The system gained efficiency, but it traded away its oldest defense. The result looked stable until it didn't. The first real warning sign arrived when sickness moved through clone-based crops, and nothing stopped it. A field that looked healthy on Monday looked doomed a few weeks later. Not because farmers forgot to work, but because the plants shared the same weak points. Diversity once acted like fire breaks. Now the fire found dry grass everywhere, and bananas, already grown as copies, became the clearest test. Bananas fed millions and filled ships because one variety dominated export markets, the Gros Michel. It handled travel, ripened predictably, and tasted right, so growers kept planting more of the same. Then Panama disease, caused by a soil fungus, spread through plantations. The fungus did not need to learn new tricks each time. The banana plants repeated the same biology, so the disease repeated the same win. The collapse did not hit like a storm and pass. It stayed in the ground, and once a plantation became infected, replanting the same clone often failed again. Whole regions watched a dependable crop turn into a liability. The lesson landed hard. When a food system bet on one genetic answer, it also accepted one shared risk. Bananas did not just get sick, they showed how sameness could fall together. After the first big scares, the fruit business did not walk away from seedless and cloned varieties. It doubled down on control. Orchards and plantations got treated less like living ecosystems and more like production lines that needed constant tuning. When a block weakened, it got ripped out and replanted fast. Replacement plants came from the same approved sources, not from saved seed. Stability came from repeating the same steps again and again. Then came containment. Farms tightened their borders because one infected plant could mean a chain reaction. Workers followed set routes. Tools got cleaned. Trucks, crates, and packing areas got monitored because pests traveled on anything that moved. Quarantines expanded around outbreaks, and movement rules started shaping whole regions. The system still produced fruit, but it did so by constantly separating the clean from the suspect. To keep yields from sliding, protection became routine. Sprays and treatments got scheduled like clockwork, not as a last resort. Inspectors looked for early symptoms, and growers acted before problems looked serious. Supply chains tightened too, with strict standards on sourcing, handling, and timing, because consistency mattered as much as safety. The fruit stayed uniform in stores, but only because people kept holding it together every day. For a while, the controls worked. Sprays knocked insects back. Clean planting stock slowed infections. Quarantines kept problems from crossing borders. Then the pests and pathogens changed. A few survivors tolerated the treatment, reproduced, and spread. Each season, what once counted as protection started acting like training. The same uniform orchards that made fruit easy to sell also offered the enemy a simple target. One weak point repeated, mile after mile. Growers answered the way they always had, more effort. They sprayed more often, switched chemicals, mixed products, and tightened schedules until farming started running on calendars and warning systems. That cost money fast. Fuel, labor, equipment, permits, inspections. It also raised the stakes for mistakes. Miss a window and an outbreak exploded. Hit too hard and beneficial insects disappeared, leaving pests free to rebound. The farm turned into a constant chase, and the chase kept getting faster. The pressure did not stay on the farm. Runoff carried residues into waterways. Drift reached nearby fields. Repeated treatments pushed resistant strains even further, so the next round needed higher doses or harsher tools. Meanwhile, buyers still demanded flawless fruit and steady supply, so stopping rarely felt like an option. The system paid twice, first in rising costs, then in environmental strain. And each time a defense failed, the next defense arrived with less room to breathe. By this point, the system had crossed a line. Many of the most popular seedless fruits did not reproduce the way fruit plants normally did. Some produced no usable seeds at all. Others produced seeds that did not grow into the same fruit people expected. So the easy fallback, save seeds, plant them and recover, did not really exist. When trouble hit, nature did not refill the pipeline. People did. That created what growers quietly lived with every season, the maintenance trap. The more a fruit depended on cloning, grafting or lab-made plantlets, the more the entire supply relied on an unbroken chain of care. A disease outbreak did not just lower yields, it threatened the very stock needed to restart. Recovery meant rebuilding from the same narrow genetic base, again and again, with little fresh diversity arriving on its own. In a seeded world, shocks had room to burn out because survivors left different offspring. Here, the survivors stayed the same. After a storm, a quarantine, or a new pathogen, farms did not pivot by planting a wave of naturally varied seedlings. They replaced losses with more copies. That kept shelves full, but it locked agriculture into constant repair. Maintenance stopped feeling like a choice. It became the price of seedless convenience. Producers and scientists looked for exits. They bred new lines that held flavor and shelf life, but carried better resistance. They crossed wild relatives into commercial fruit, even when it took years to get anything edible again. Labs sped that up with genetic mapping and later gene editing, hunting for the exact switches that helped a plant survive a fungus or a virus. The goal sounded simple: keep the convenience, rebuild the defenses. Growers also tried to break the pattern in the field. Instead of one variety across thousands of acres, they planted mixes, rotated rootstocks, and tested regional cultivars that tolerated local pests. Some operations ran side-by-side blocks like fire breaks, so one disease wave did not sweep clean through everything at once. It reduced risk, but it raised a new problem. Every extra variety meant new handling rules, new ripening schedules, and new sorting lines. Then the market pulled hard in the opposite direction. Shoppers expected the same size, the same sweetness, the same look, week after week. Supermarkets wrote that expectation into contracts, and those contracts rewarded sameness and punished surprises. A tougher new variety that tasted slightly different often lost shelf space, even if it saved a farm. So the system experimented at the edges, but kept shipping the familiar clones. The trap loosened, yet it never fully opened. Seedless fruit had ended up everywhere. Grapes arrived in plastic tubs, citrus came as easy peel wedges, and bananas stayed uniform from one country to the next. Stores stayed stocked because the system had learned how to repeat the same winning plants again and again on schedule. That abundance looked like security, but it had rested on a quiet assumption: someone kept the plants going constantly. Many of these fruits had not carried their future inside them anymore. Without useful seeds, they had depended on cuttings, grafts, tissue culture, and nursery pipelines that never stopped. Farms had replaced natural selection with management. Clean planting material, strict movement rules, sprays timed to outbreaks, and rapid replanting after losses. The fruit stayed cheap and familiar, but the work behind it had only grown heavier. In today's markets, convenience had won and diversity had thinned. A disease did not need to defeat millions of different trees, it only needed to crack a few dominant clones. So the result had been a permanent commitment, monitoring, breeding, quarantines, and constant intervention just to hold the line. Chapter 1's world had renewed itself through seeds and variation. This world had survived because people refused to let it stop.